My wife handed me the divorce papers and said, "You have 48 hours to get your things out. My new boyfriend owns this house now." I just smiled and agreed. But when he stepped foot in that house, he realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. You know that feeling when you walk into your own house and immediately sense something's off? Like when you come home from vacation and can't shake the feeling someone's been sleeping in your bed, eating your porridge, and basically treating your castle like their personal Airbnb. Yeah, well, multiply that by about 1,000 and you'll get close to what hit me when I pushed through my front door that Friday afternoon. I'd just survived another soul-crushing day at the law firm, the kind where every client thinks they're your only client, and every partner acts like they're doing you a favor by letting you breathe their recycled office air. My tie was already loosened, my jacket slung over my shoulder, and all I wanted was a cold beer and maybe some mindless Netflix to wash away the taste of corporate BS that had been coating my tongue for the past 10 hours. But instead of the usual domestic tranquility, Clara probably scrolling through Instagram while some reality TV garbage played in the background, I walked into what felt like a goddamn ambush. There she was, my beloved wife of 12 years, sitting at our granite kitchen counter like she was conducting a board meeting. Clara had always been dramatic, but this was next-level theater. She'd clearly been waiting for me, probably rehearsing her lines and checking her lipstick in her phone camera. The woman who usually greeted me in yoga pants and a messy bun was dressed like she was heading to a job interview or a funeral. And there it was, sitting between us like a loaded weapon, a manila envelope. Not just any envelope, mind you, but one of those thick, official-looking bastards that scream, "Your life is about to get complicated." She pushed it across the counter with the kind of casual indifference you'd use to slide someone the check at a restaurant. Except this wasn't splitting the bill for overpriced pasta. This was apparently splitting up our entire existence. "You have 48 hours to get your things out," she said, her voice carrying that rehearsed quality that told me she'd been practicing this moment in the mirror. "My new boyfriend owns this house now. Let me tell you, I've been in plenty of courtrooms where opposing counsel has tried to blindside me with last-minute evidence or surprise witnesses. I've had clients lie to my face and judges tear apart my arguments like they were made of wet tissue paper. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, had prepared me for the sheer audacity of that moment. My new boyfriend owns this house now. The words hit me like a freight train driven by the grim Reaper himself. Not, "We need to talk," or "I'm not happy," or even, "I want a divorce." Nope. Straight to "pack your shit and get out because I've already replaced you with someone who apparently has better credit." I stared at those papers like they might spontaneously combust if I looked hard enough. Part of me wanted to tear into that envelope right then and there, to see exactly what kind of legal fiction Clara and her mystery man had cooked up. But another part of me, the part that had learned to read people during 12 years of marriage and 15 years of practicing law, could see exactly what was happening here. This wasn't grief. This wasn't even anger. This was performance art. Clara was watching me like a hawk, waiting for the explosion. She wanted tears, begging, maybe some good old-fashioned male rage to make her feel justified in whatever nuclear option she'd just deployed. Her eyes had that gleam that meant she thought she was holding all the cards, like she'd just played a royal flush while I was sitting there with a pair of twos. The thing about Clara is that she'd never been particularly interested in the boring details of our life together. When we bought this house 8 years ago, she was all about the marble countertops, the walk-in closets, and how impressed her book club friends would be. The actual paperwork? The legal stuff? That was boring lawyer crap that she was happy to let me handle while she picked out throw pillows and argued with contractors about backsplash tiles. But I remembered every single detail of that purchase. I remembered the late-night phone calls with my father, the careful structuring, the deliberate decisions that seemed overly cautious at the time. Dad had always been paranoid about protecting assets, probably because he'd seen too many good men get cleaned out by vindictive ex-wives or bad business partners. "Always own your foundation," he used to say. "People can steal your comfort, but never let them steal the ground beneath you." So as I stood there, looking at my wife's smug little smile and her perfectly rehearsed bombshell, I felt something unexpected bubble up from somewhere deep in my chest. It wasn't rage or despair or even shock. It was laughter. Not out loud laughter. I'm not completely insane. but the kind of internal, soul-deep amusement that comes from watching someone confidently walk into a glass door they didn't see coming. Because Clara, bless her manipulative little heart, had absolutely no idea what she was actually saying. She thought she was delivering a death blow. She thought she was demonstrating her power, her ability to destroy me with a single manila envelope and a real estate investor with good hair. What she'd actually done was hand me the setup for the most satisfying legal comeback of my entire career. I looked up at her, taking in that expectant expression that barely contained glee as she waited for me to crumble. Instead, I did something that clearly wasn't in her script. I smiled. Not a bitter smile or a sarcastic smirk, but a genuine, calm, almost pleasant smile. The kind of expression that had made opposing attorneys nervous for over a decade, because it usually meant I knew something they didn't. Fine, I said, sliding the envelope back across the counter without even opening it. 48 hours. That's generous of you. And just like that, I watched Clara's confidence flicker like a candle in the wind. For just a second, uncertainty crept across her features. This clearly wasn't how she'd imagined this scene playing out. She'd expected begging, pleading, maybe some dramatic promises to change or fight for our marriage. What she got instead was a man who looked like he'd just been told the weather forecast. Because unlike Clara, I knew exactly what was coming next. And it was going to be absolutely beautiful. So you're probably wondering who this mystery man is, right? The guy who apparently swooped in and bought my house out from under me like some kind of real estate superhero? Well, let me paint you a picture of Trent Wallace, because this character deserves a proper introduction. Picture every sleazy real estate investor you've ever seen in a bad movie. Then dial the douchebag factor up to 11. We're talking about a guy who probably practices his power handshake in the mirror and uses phrases like synergistic opportunities in casual conversation. Trent's the kind of man who wears cologne strong enough to choke a horse and thinks a Rolex automatically makes him Warren Buffett's long-lost nephew. I'd actually met this clown before, believe it or not. He'd shown up at a few neighborhood barbecues over the past couple of months, always managing to steer conversations toward his extensive property portfolio and his disruptive approach to residential investment. The guy couldn't order a hot dog without somehow working in a mention of his latest acquisition or his exit strategy. Real charmer, this one. Clara had been acting weird around him from the start, but I chalked it up to her usual attention-seeking behavior. She'd always been the type to flirt with the mailman if it meant someone would tell her she looked younger than her age. But apparently, while I was busy actually working for a living, Clara and Trent had been cooking up their little real estate fairy tale. The morning after Clara dropped her bombshell, she was practically vibrating with excitement. She kept checking her phone every 30 seconds like she was expecting a text from the Nobel Prize committee, and she'd clearly spent extra time on her makeup. You know that look women get when they think they're about to win the lottery? That's exactly how Clara looked as she fluttered around the kitchen, humming some pop song and acting like she'd just solved world hunger. Trent's coming by this afternoon, she announced, not even bothering to look at me as she poured herself a cup of coffee. He wants to do a walkthrough of his new property. His new property. She said it like she was announcing the weather, but with this little smirk that told me she was savoring every syllable. This was her moment of triumph, her big gotcha after 12 years of marriage. She probably figured I'd be curled up in a corner somewhere, sobbing into a box of tissues and begging her to reconsider. Instead, I was sitting at the breakfast table, calmly reading the sports section and occasionally nodding like she was discussing weekend plans. Because honestly, this whole situation was better than cable TV. That's nice, honey, I said, not looking up from an article about the latest quarterback controversy. Should I put out the good china, or are we keeping this casual? The sarcasm went right over her head, which was pretty much par for the course. Clara had always been immune to subtlety, probably because she was usually too busy planning her next Instagram post to pay attention to actual human communication. Around 3 o'clock, right on schedule, I heard the unmistakable sound of Trent's obnoxious black Escalade pulling into our driveway. And when I say obnoxious, I mean this thing was tricked out like a rapper's music video prop. Chrome everything, tinted windows, and rims that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. The exhaust system had that unnecessarily loud rumble that screams, "I have a small penis, but I'm hoping you won't notice." I positioned myself in the living room with a perfect view of the front door, settling into my favorite armchair with a cup of coffee and yesterday's newspaper. Call it morbid curiosity, but I wanted to see this train wreck up close and personal. Trent strutted up to the front door like he was walking a red carpet, checking his reflection in his phone screen and adjusting his tie. The man was wearing a three-piece suit on a Saturday afternoon, because apparently casual wear wasn't sufficiently impressive for claiming ownership of someone else's house. His hair was slicked back with enough product to waterproof a small boat, and his smile had that predatory quality that made me think of used car salesmen and televangelists. Clara practically sprinted to let him in, and I swear she giggled. Actually giggled, like a teenager meeting her favorite boy band member. It was both pathetic and hilarious, watching a grown woman turn into a simpering fool over a guy whose personality had all the depth of a puddle in August. "Trent," she squealed, throwing her arms around him like he'd just returned from war instead of driving across town in his gas-guzzling monument to insecurity. "Welcome home. Welcome home." Jesus Christ, the woman really was committed to this performance. Trent soaked up the attention like a sponge, wrapping Clara in what I'm sure he thought was a suave embrace while scanning the room over her shoulder. His eyes landed on me sitting there with my coffee, and his grin widened into something that would have made a shark proud. Well, he said, his voice carrying that fake confidence that insecure men use when they think they're winning. "Hope you're all packed up, old man. I've got big plans for this place, and they don't include previous tenants hanging around." Old man. The guy was maybe 5 years younger than me, but he said it like he was addressing his grandfather. I could practically see him puffing out his chest, marking his territory like some kind of real estate alpha male. I took a slow sip of my coffee and looked him up and down with the kind of casual assessment that had made junior associates sweat during depositions. "Big plans, huh? That's exciting. What kind of improvements are you thinking?" "Oh, you know." Trent waved his hand dismissively. "Complete renovation. This place has got good bones, but the previous owner clearly didn't have any vision. I'm thinking modern, sleek, maybe knock out some walls, really open up the space." The previous owner. That would be me, sitting right there in front of him. The balls on this guy were truly impressive. Clara was practically bouncing on her toes, watching this exchange like it was the season finale of her favorite reality show. She'd clearly built up this moment in her head, imagining Trent as some kind of conquering hero riding in to save her from her boring suburban life. "I like the view from this living room," Trent continued, walking over to the window and looking out at the backyard like he was surveying his kingdom. "Perfect spot for entertaining. Clara tells me you've got some nice neighbors. I'm looking forward to meeting them at the next block party." I had to hand it to him. The man really knew how to sell a fantasy. He'd managed to convince Clara that he was not only buying our house, but also stepping into our entire social circle, ready to take over my life like he was updating his LinkedIn profile. But here's the thing about fantasies. They're only as strong as their foundation. And Trent's particular delusion was built on quicksand. I raised my coffee cup in a mock toast, giving him my most pleasant smile. "Welcome home, Trent. I hope you enjoy every single minute of it." You know how some people have those Pinterest-perfect childhoods with family game nights and homemade cookies cooling on windowsills? Yeah, well, that wasn't exactly the Henderson household growing up. Don't get me wrong, my old man loved me in his own gruff, no-nonsense way. But Robert Henderson wasn't the type to express affection through bedtime stories and Little League coaching. His version of parental wisdom came wrapped in cold, hard business sense and delivered with the emotional warmth of a tax audit. But damn if the man wasn't right about pretty much everything. Dad had grown up during the tail end of the Great Depression, one of those kids who understood early that security was something you built brick by brick, not something that just magically appeared because you wished hard enough. His own father had lost everything in the stock market crash, house, business, dignity, the whole 9 yards, and Dad spent his entire life making sure that particular family tradition died with his old man. "Always own your foundation," he used to tell me, usually while we were sitting in his home office on Sunday afternoons, surrounded by filing cabinets that looked like they could survive a nuclear apocalypse. "People can steal your comfort, but never let them steal the ground beneath you." At the time, I thought he was being paranoid. I mean, this was a guy who kept 3 different savings accounts at 3 different banks, just in case one of them decided to spontaneously combust. He had backup plans for his backup plans and contingency strategies that would have impressed Pentagon war planners. To my teenage brain, it all seemed like overkill. But Dad had seen enough in his 68 years to know that the world had a nasty habit of kicking you in the teeth right when you thought you had everything figured out. He'd watched business partners screw each other over million-dollar deals, seen marriages implode over money, witnessed supposedly rock-solid companies disappear overnight because someone got greedy or careless or just plain stupid. Trust is a luxury, he'd say, usually while showing me some new legal document or investment strategy. Hope for the best, but always, and I mean always, prepare for the worst. Because when people show you who they really are, you better believe them the first time. The man had a point. During his 40 years in business, Dad had been burned exactly once by a partner who embezzled from their construction company. Once. After that, every contract, every partnership, every major decision went through more legal scrutiny than a Supreme Court nomination. He never got screwed again because he never gave anyone the opportunity. So when Clara and I bought the house 8 years ago, fresh-faced and stupidly optimistic about our future together, guess who insisted on handling all the paperwork? That's right, dear old Dad, armed with his magnifying glass and his inherent distrust of anything that seemed too simple or straightforward. Clara, bless her materialistic little heart, was way too busy picking out granite countertops and arguing with the interior designer about whether the master bedroom needed a chandelier to pay attention to boring legal details. She figured marriage meant, what's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. And since she'd never owned anything more valuable than a Honda Civic, the concept of asset protection was about as foreign to her as quantum physics. Just put both our names on everything, she'd said, waving her hand dismissively when I tried to explain Dad's concerns. We're married, for God's sake. What's the worst that could happen? Famous last words, right there. But Dad had pulled me aside one evening, his expression serious as a heart attack. We were standing in his garage, surrounded by the organized chaos of a man who never threw anything away because you never knew when you might need a specific washer or bolt or piece of wire. Son, he said, and I knew I was about to get the full Robert Henderson treatment because he only called me son when he was about to drop some serious wisdom. You love that girl, and I can see why. She's pretty, she's fun, she makes you laugh. But love and business are two different animals, and you better learn that distinction before it costs you everything you've worked for. He'd already done his homework, of course. Dad never went into any situation blind. He'd researched Clara's family background, her financial history, her credit score, basically everything short of hiring a private investigator. What he'd found wasn't exactly confidence-inspiring. Her family's got a pattern, he explained, pulling out a folder that was thicker than most novels. 3 generations of financial instability, bad decisions, and marriages that ended with one party getting cleaned out. Her mother took her father for half his business in the divorce. Her grandmother did the same thing to her grandfather. It's like genetic programming. I'd protested, naturally. I was young and in love and convinced that Clara was different, that our relationship was special, that we beat the odds through the sheer power of our commitment to each other. All that romantic nonsense that makes perfect sense when you're thinking with your heart instead of your brain. Dad just nodded patiently, like he'd expected exactly that reaction. I hope you're right, son. I really do. But hope isn't a strategy. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to set up Henderson Holdings LLC, and that entity is going to own your house. You'll be the sole member and manager. Clara can enjoy living there, decorating it, hosting her little book club meetings, whatever makes her happy. But the actual ownership? That stays in the family. At the time, it seemed like excessive paranoia wrapped in legal mumbo-jumbo. Clara and I were happy, planning our future together, talking about kids and retirement, and growing old on that front porch. The idea that she'd ever try to steal the house from me was about as believable as her claiming she could fly to Mars on weekends. But Dad insisted, and honestly, it was easier to go along with his paranoid schemes than to fight him on it. So Henderson Holdings LLC was born, a single-member limited liability company with me as the sole owner and the house as its primary asset. Clara never asked questions about the paperwork. She was too busy planning our housewarming party and figuring out which Instagram filter made the living room look most impressive. Someday you'll thank me for this, Dad had said as we filed the final documents. Maybe not today, maybe not next year, but someday when the world shows you exactly how ugly it can get, you'll remember this conversation. The old man passed away 3 years later, heart attack in his sleep, probably still clutching a legal document in his hand. At his funeral, people talked about his business success, his integrity, his unwavering principles. What they didn't mention was his greatest gift to me, the foresight to protect my foundation before I even knew it needed protecting. Now, sitting in my kitchen while Clara strutted around like she'd just won the lottery, I could practically hear Dad's voice echoing from whatever lawyer's paradise he'd probably talked his way into managing. Told you so, son. Trust is a luxury you can't afford. Thanks, Dad. You magnificent, paranoid bastard. You saved my ass from beyond the grave. You know that moment in horror movies when the victim finally realizes they've been talking to the serial killer this whole time? That split second when their face goes from confident to confused to absolutely terrified? Well, watching Clara's expression change as my reaction sank in was better than any Hollywood thriller I'd ever seen. See, Clara had choreographed this whole scene in her head. She'd probably been rehearsing it for weeks, maybe even practicing her lines in the mirror while I was at work, perfecting that smug little delivery about Trent owning the house. In her twisted little fantasy, this was supposed to be her big moment of triumph. The scene where she finally got revenge for every perceived slight, every boring dinner conversation, every time I'd chosen work over whatever drama-filled social event she wanted to attend. She'd expected tears. Hell, she'd probably been looking forward to them. Maybe some begging, some desperate promises to change, to be a better husband, to pay more attention to her needs. Or better yet, maybe some good old-fashioned male rage, shouting, threatening, the kind of emotional breakdown that would justify her betrayal and make her feel like the victim in this whole mess. What she got instead was something that clearly wasn't in her script. A man who looked like he'd just been told his coffee was ready. After I slid those papers back across the counter with my casual 48 hours, that's generous, the silence in that kitchen stretched out like taffy. Clara just stood there, blinking at me like I'd started speaking ancient Greek, her perfectly rehearsed moment of victory suddenly feeling a lot less victorious. That's it? She finally asked, her voice carrying this weird mixture of confusion and disappointment. That's all you're going to say? I took another sip of my coffee, and let me tell you, that was some damn good coffee. The expensive stuff Clara had insisted on buying because the neighbors would judge us if we served Folgers at dinner parties, and really looked at my wife. 12 years of marriage, and I was seeing her clearly for maybe the first time in a decade. She was dressed for battle, no doubt about it. Hair perfectly styled, makeup applied with the precision of a war paint artist, outfit chosen to make her look powerful and in control. This wasn't the Clara who lounged around in yoga pants and oversized sweaters. This was Clara in full performance mode, playing the role of the strong, independent woman who'd finally found the courage to leave her boring husband. But there was something else there, something she probably didn't even realize was showing. Underneath all that manufactured confidence was a flicker of uncertainty, like she'd been so focused on delivering her bombshell that she hadn't really thought about what came next. What did you expect me to say, Clara? I asked, setting my cup down with deliberate calm. Did you want me to beg? Maybe throw myself at your feet and promise to be a better husband? Or were you hoping for the full dramatic meltdown? Shouting, crying, maybe throwing some furniture around for effect. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish that had suddenly found itself on dry land. For the first time in probably years, Clara was speechless. Because here's the thing, I continued, leaning back in my chair with the kind of relaxed posture that had driven opposing attorneys crazy during depositions. You seem to have this whole thing figured out. New boyfriend, new house, new life. Why would I stand in the way of your happiness? The confusion on her face was deepening, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out why this wasn't going according to plan. Clara had always been pretty good at reading people's emotions. It was one of her talents as a serial flirt and part-time manipulator, but she was staring at me like I'd become a completely different species. You're not upset? She asked, and there was something almost pleading in her voice. Like she needed me to be devastated to make this whole betrayal make sense in her mind. That's when I gave her the smile. Not the bitter, sarcastic smirk she was probably expecting. Not the fake, forced grin of a man trying to pretend everything was fine. This was my genuine article, the calm, confident smile that had made law school professors nervous and turned cocky opposing counsel into stammering idiots. It was the smile of a man who knew something nobody else in the room knew. Why would I be upset? I asked, and I swear my voice was so level it could have been used to hang wallpaper. You've made your choice, Clara. You've found someone who makes you happy, someone who can give you things I apparently can't. I respect that. I really do. Now she looked genuinely disturbed. This was definitely not the reaction she'd been banking on. Clara had spent 12 years learning to read my moods, my tells, my emotional patterns. She knew what I looked like when I was angry, frustrated, hurt, or disappointed. But this was uncharted territory. But this is our house, she stammered, gesturing around the kitchen like she was trying to remind me where we were. Our life, everything we built together, is exactly what you're choosing to walk away from. I finished for her. And that's fine, Clara. Really. If Trent makes you happier than I do, if his house is better than our house, if his life is more exciting than the life we've shared, well, then you should absolutely go for it. The thing about Clara is that she'd always needed drama to feel alive. Peaceful contentment was boring to her. She thrived on conflict, on emotional highs and lows, on the kind of relationship turbulence that made for good reality TV. Our marriage had gotten too stable for her taste, too predictable, too much like the life of actual adults instead of teenagers high on hormones and bad decisions. So she'd created her own drama, her own crisis, her own big moment of rebellion. The problem was, she'd expected me to play my assigned role in her little production, and I was apparently ad-libbing. You're scaring me, she said quietly, and for the first time since I'd walked into that kitchen, I heard something genuine in her voice. Not the rehearsed confidence, not the manufactured drama, actual, honest-to-God fear. Because Clara, for all her faults, wasn't stupid. She could sense that something was very, very wrong with this picture. A normal husband would be fighting for his marriage, his house, his life. A normal husband would be angry or devastated or at least confused. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't confused. I was calm. Completely, utterly, unnaturally calm. And that smile never wavered. That night, while Clara was upstairs probably video chatting with Trent about their grand plans for their new life together, I did what any reasonable man would do in my situation. I poured myself 3 fingers of Dad's old bourbon, the good stuff he'd been saving for special occasions that never came, and headed down to my home office to review exactly what kind of legal ammunition I had in my arsenal. Now, most guys keep their important documents in a shoebox or maybe a filing cabinet if they're feeling particularly organized. But remember, I'm Robert Henderson's son, which means my document storage system could probably survive a direct nuclear strike and still produce legible paperwork. Dad had drilled into me the importance of keeping meticulous records, and over the years, I'd turned that lesson into something approaching an art form. My office, which Clara had always dismissed as that boring room with all the files, was basically Fort Knox for paperwork. Fireproof filing cabinets, multiple backup copies of everything important, documents organized by date, type, and relevance. Insurance policies, tax returns, investment records, legal documents. All of it carefully maintained and regularly updated. Because you never know when some vindictive spouse might try to burn down your entire existence. I started with the Henderson Holdings LLC file, a thick folder that contained the most beautiful collection of legal documents this side of the Supreme Court archives. Every single paper perfectly executed, notarized, filed with the appropriate government agencies, and backed up in triplicate. Dad would have been proud. This wasn't just documentation, it was a masterpiece of asset protection. The original articles of incorporation, filed 8 years ago with the state, clearly establishing Henderson Holdings as a single-member LLC with me as the sole owner and manager. The operating agreement, drafted by one of the best business attorneys in the city, outlining my complete control over all company assets. The deed transfer, moving our house from joint ownership to LLC ownership, properly recorded with the county and backed up by title insurance. But here's the really beautiful part. Every single month for the past 8 years, Henderson Holdings had been paying the mortgage, The property taxes, the insurance premiums, the HOA fees, every damn expense associated with that house. And every single payment had come from the LLC's business account, creating an unbreakable paper trail that would make any forensic accountant weep with joy. Clara had never questioned where the money came from. As far as she knew, the mortgage payments just magically happened every month, like some kind of domestic fairy was taking care of all the boring adult responsibilities while she focused on the important stuff, like redecorating the guest bathroom for the third time or arguing with her book club about whether they should read 50 Shades of Grey or stick with their usual diet of self-help books and celebrity memoirs. I pulled out the property tax records next because nothing says legitimate ownership quite like 8 years of continuous tax payments. Every single year, Henderson Holdings LLC had dutifully paid its share to keep the local government happy and the property legally protected. Clara's name appeared exactly nowhere on any of these documents, because why would it? She'd never owned the house in the first place. Then came the insurance policies, homeowners insurance, umbrella coverage, liability protection, all of it in the name of Henderson Holdings LLC. The insurance company had been sending me renewal notices and policy updates for nearly a decade, all addressed to the LLC, all paid for by the LLC, all legally binding evidence that Clara had about as much claim to ownership as a random stranger walking by on the sidewalk. I was about halfway through my bourbon and completely absorbed in the satisfaction of reviewing my perfectly organized legal fortress when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus Lee, my old law school buddy who'd gone into family law and had been dealing with divorce cases and asset disputes for the past 15 years. Marcus had seen every kind of marital warfare imaginable, from basic custody fights to complex international asset hiding schemes. Henderson. Marcus's voice boomed through the phone with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested he'd also been enjoying some adult beverages. Please tell me you're calling because you need help burying a body, because normal legal work is boring the hell out of me lately. Even better, I said, taking another sip of bourbon and feeling that warm satisfaction that comes from having all your ducks in a row. I need help with what might be the most satisfying case of attempted real estate fraud I've ever encountered. Oh shit. Now you've got my attention. Lay it on me. So I did. I told him about Clara's dramatic envelope presentation, about Trent and his ridiculous claims of ownership, about the 48-hour eviction notice that had all the legal weight of a grocery list. Marcus listened in increasingly gleeful silence, and I could practically hear him grinning through the phone. Wait. He interrupted when I got to the part about Trent planning renovations. You're telling me this clown thinks he bought a house from a woman who never owned it in the first place? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And he's planning to move in this weekend? According to Clara, yeah. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for about 10 seconds, and then Marcus absolutely lost it. We're talking full-blown, tears in his eyes, can't breathe laughter that went on for a solid minute. When he finally pulled himself together, his voice was still shaking with amusement. Dude. This is Christmas morning, New Year's Eve, and winning the lottery all rolled into one. Do you have any idea how rare it is to get a case this beautifully stupid? I mean, attempted real estate fraud based on documents that don't exist, from a seller who doesn't own the property, to a buyer who apparently never bothered to do even basic due diligence? This is going to be legendary. So you think we can handle this? Handle it? Henderson, we're not just going to handle it. We're going to turn it into a goddamn masterpiece of legal destruction. I'm talking sheriff's deputies, official notices, maybe even a little trespassing charge if this Trent character gets too comfortable. How's Monday morning sound for completely ruining some people's lives? Monday sounds perfect. Beautiful. Send me copies of everything, and I mean everything, tonight if you can. I want to spend my Sunday reviewing this paperwork and planning exactly how we're going to demolish these idiots. This is going to be so much fun, I might not even charge you my usual rate. After we hung up, I sat back in my leather chair, surrounded by the organized evidence of my father's paranoid genius, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, unadulterated satisfaction. Not the mild contentment of a job well done or the fleeting happiness of a nice evening with friends. This was the deep, soul-satisfying pleasure that comes from watching your enemies walk directly into a trap they'd built for themselves. Clara and Trent thought they were playing chess, but they'd actually shown up to a gunfight with plastic spoons. And Monday morning, they were about to find out exactly what real legal firepower looked like. Saturday morning rolled around with all the dramatic tension of a bad soap opera, and I have to admit, I was kind of excited to see how this whole shit show was going to play out. Clara had been bouncing around the house since dawn like a caffeinated cheerleader, checking her appearance every 5 minutes and rearranging furniture like she was preparing for a photo shoot. She'd changed outfits 3 times, settled on something that screamed, "successful woman making power moves," and had been glued to her phone all morning, presumably coordinating the details of Operation Steal My House with her knight in shining polyester. Me? I was enjoying the most relaxed Saturday I'd had in months. While Clara stress-cleaned surfaces that were already spotless and practiced her casual but confident poses in front of the hallway mirror, I was camped out in the living room with a cup of coffee and the weekend paper, feeling like a guy with front-row seats to the circus. The beauty of knowing you're about to watch someone drive their life into a brick wall at highway speeds is that you can actually appreciate the craftsmanship of their self-destruction. Every nervous glance Clara threw in my direction, every time she checked her phone for updates from Trent, every little detail of her elaborate performance, it was all building toward a crescendo that was going to be absolutely magnificent. Around noon, I heard her talking to someone on the phone in that fake sweet voice she used when she was trying to impress people she barely knew. "Oh, Trent, honey, I can't wait for you to see everything. The house is going to be perfect for you." Yes, he's being very cooperative about the whole thing. No problems at all. He's actually being surprisingly mature about it. Mature. That was rich. If Clara only knew that my maturity was really just barely contained amusement at watching her dig her own grave with a golden shovel. The anticipation was killing me, honestly. It was like waiting for the punchline to the world's longest joke, except the joke was my marriage and the punchline was going to involve law enforcement. Marcus had called me earlier that morning to confirm that everything was in place for Monday's legal massacre, and he'd been so excited about the case that he'd probably spent his entire morning researching additional charges we could potentially file. "This is going to be textbook," he'd said, barely able to contain his professional glee. "Attempted fraud, potential criminal trespass, maybe even conspiracy if we can prove they planned this together. I haven't been this excited about a case since that CEO tried to hide assets in his kid's trust fund. But first, we had to let our star performers take the stage and really commit to their roles. Right on schedule, because Trent struck me as the type of guy who thought punctuality was a sign of alpha male dominance. I heard the unmistakable roar of his ridiculous Escalade pulling into the driveway. And when I say ridiculous, I mean this thing sounded like a mechanical dragon having an asthma attack. The exhaust system was tuned to maximum obnoxiousness, probably because Trent had never met a subtle gesture he couldn't turn into a spectacle. I positioned myself strategically in my favorite armchair, the one with the perfect sightline to the front door and the driveway beyond. Call it morbid curiosity, but I wanted to see every detail of this performance. Clara had been building up this moment for weeks, probably fantasizing about how impressive Trent would look taking possession of his new property, and I wasn't about to miss the main event. Through the window, I watched Trent emerge from his gas-guzzling monument to insecurity like some kind of real estate messiah. The man was dressed like he was heading to a board meeting at Goldman Sachs. 3-piece suit, Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than most people's rent, and enough cologne to fumigate a small building. His hair was styled with the kind of precision that suggested he'd spent more time in front of the mirror that morning than most women do getting ready for their wedding. But here's what really got me. He was carrying a box of wine. Not just any wine, mind you, but one of those expensive gift sets with the fancy packaging and the gold foil, the kind of thing you bring when you're trying way too hard to make an impression. He'd probably spent an hour at the wine shop, asking the sales clerk which bottle would make him look most successful and sophisticated. Clara practically teleported to the front door, and I swear she opened it before Trent even had a chance to knock. The woman had been watching for him like a hawk, probably timing her entrance to maximize the dramatic impact. She threw her arms around him with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for soldiers returning from war, and Trent soaked up the attention like a sponge soaks up water. "Welcome home, baby," Clara squealed, and I had to resist the urge to throw something at the wall. The woman was really committed to this performance, I'll give her that. Trent wrapped his free arm around her while keeping his precious wine bottle safe, and over Clara's shoulder, his eyes immediately started scanning the interior of what he thought was his new castle. I could practically see the dollar signs dancing in his pupils as he took in the hardwood floors, the crown molding, the custom kitchen cabinets that Clara had spent 6 months selecting. Then his gaze landed on me, sitting there with my coffee and my newspaper like I didn't have a care in the world, and his smile shifted into something that would have made a loan shark proud. This was his moment of triumph, his chance to assert dominance over the defeated previous owner, and he was clearly planning to savor every second of it. Well, he said, disentangling himself from Clara and strutting into my living room like he owned the place, which, in his deluded mind, he apparently did. Hope you're all packed up, old man. I've got big plans for this place, and they don't include previous tenants hanging around like expired milk. Previous tenants. The balls on this guy were truly something to behold. I looked up from my newspaper with the kind of mild interest you'd show to a particularly entertaining street performer, took a leisurely sip of my coffee, and gave him my most pleasant smile. Big plans sound exciting, Trent. What kind of improvements are you thinking of making? He puffed out his chest like a peacock displaying his plumage and started walking around the room like he was conducting a property inspection. Complete renovation, obviously. This place has good bones, but it needs a modern touch. Maybe knock out some walls, really open up the space, Make it worthy of the investment. The investment. Right. The investment in a property he didn't own, couldn't legally claim, and was about to get very publicly ejected from. I like the view from this living room, he continued, walking over to the window and gazing out at the backyard like Napoleon surveying a conquered territory. Perfect spot for entertaining clients. Clara tells me you've got some real influential neighbors. I'm looking forward to networking with them. Networking? With my neighbors? Using my house as his base of operations. The man's audacity was almost impressive. I raised my coffee cup in a mock toast, maintaining that same pleasant expression that had been making Clara nervous for the past 2 days. Welcome home, Trent, I said, my voice carrying just enough warmth to sound sincere while hiding the absolute glee bubbling underneath. I hope you enjoy every single minute of it. You know that moment in movies when the hero has been playing dumb for the entire film, letting the bad guys think they're winning, and then suddenly reveals they've been 10 steps ahead the whole time? Well, welcome to my personal Academy Award moment, because what happened next was better than anything Hollywood could have scripted. Trent was still strutting around my living room like he was auditioning for lifestyles of the rich and delusional, pointing out features he wanted to change and improvements he planned to make. Clara was following him around like a love-struck puppy, nodding enthusiastically at every brilliant observation that fell from his mouth. The man had opinions about everything. The paint colors were too conservative, the furniture arrangement lacked flow, and apparently my choice in window treatments suggested a fundamental misunderstanding of modern aesthetics. I was enjoying the show immensely, sipping my coffee and occasionally making helpful suggestions like, "Oh, that's an interesting idea," or "I never thought of it that way." Just your friendly neighborhood soon-to-be ex-husband, being supportive of the new owner's vision for his stolen property. But the real entertainment was watching Clara. She kept throwing these nervous glances in my direction, clearly unsettled by my continued calm demeanor. This was supposed to be her moment of triumph, her big, take that, to the boring husband who'd never appreciated her properly. Instead, she was starting to look like someone who'd ordered a dramatic confrontation and received a polite conversation instead. Trent, meanwhile, was completely oblivious to any undercurrents of weirdness. He was too busy basking in what he thought was his victory lap, probably already mentally redecorating and planning housewarming parties where he could brag about his latest acquisition to anyone who'd listen. "The kitchen's got potential," he was saying, running his hand along the granite countertop that Clara had spent 3 months selecting. "But these cabinets are definitely going to have to go. I'm thinking something more contemporary, maybe some stainless steel accents." That's when I heard it, the sound that made my heart sing like a choir of angels with law degrees. 3 sharp, official knocks on the front door. Not the casual rap of a neighbor dropping by, or the quick knock of a delivery driver. These were the kind of knocks that meant business, The kind that made guilty people start sweating and innocent people start wondering what the hell was going on. Marcus had outdone himself with the timing. We'd planned this for maximum dramatic impact, and the man had delivered like a Swiss watch manufacturer with a flair for theater. Clara and Trent both froze mid-conversation, looking toward the door with the kind of confused expressions people get when their carefully orchestrated plans suddenly develop unexpected complications. Who could that be? Clara asked, her voice carrying just a hint of the nervousness that had been building all morning. I stood up slowly, setting my coffee cup down with deliberate care, and smiled that same pleasant smile that had been making everyone uncomfortable for the past few days. "Oh, I think I know who that might be," I said, walking toward the front door with the leisurely pace of a man who had absolutely nothing to hide. Probably just some routine business. You know how it is. Through the peephole, I could see exactly what I'd been hoping for: 2 county sheriff's deputies in full uniform, complete with badges, utility belts, and the kind of serious expressions that suggested they weren't here to sell Girl Scout cookies. Behind them, I caught a glimpse of Marcus standing next to his BMW, probably trying not to look too excited about the legal carnage he was about to witness. I opened the door with a warm, welcoming smile, like I was greeting old friends at a barbecue. "Good afternoon, officers. How can I help you?" The older deputy, a grizzled veteran who looked like he'd seen every kind of human stupidity imaginable during his career, stepped forward with a clipboard and an expression that could have been carved from granite. "We're looking for a Mr. Trent Wallace," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made smart people immediately start cooperating. "We have some questions about a property ownership dispute." "Oh, you're in luck," I said, stepping aside and gesturing toward the living room where Trent was standing like a deer caught in headlights. "Mr. Wallace is right here. He was just telling me about all the renovations he's planning for his new house." The second deputy, younger but equally serious, followed his partner into the house while I remained by the door, the picture of helpful cooperation. Clara was pressed against the kitchen counter like she was trying to become one with the granite, her face cycling through various shades of pale that would have been impressive if they weren't so terrifying. Trent, to his credit, tried to maintain his composure. The man straightened his tie, puffed out his chest, and approached the deputies with the kind of forced confidence that suggested he thought this was all some kind of administrative misunderstanding that could be cleared up with the right combination of charm and bluster. "Officers," he said, extending his hand like he was greeting business associates, "I'm Trent Wallace. I'm not sure what this is about, but I'm happy to clear up any confusion." The older deputy ignored the offered handshake and consulted his clipboard instead. "Mr. Wallace, we need to verify your claim of ownership regarding this property. Do you have documentation proving that you legally own this house?" "Of course I do," Trent replied, his voice still carrying that manufactured confidence even as a thin sheen of sweat started forming on his forehead. "I have all the paperwork right here." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder that looked suspiciously similar to the one Clara had presented to me 2 days earlier. With a flourish that suggested he thought this would end the conversation immediately, he handed the folder to the deputy. "Everything's in order," he said, his smile becoming a little more strained as the deputy began examining the documents. "As you can see, the property was legally transferred to me through a standard real estate transaction." The deputy spent about 30 seconds scanning the papers, his expression growing more skeptical with each page. Then he looked up at Trent with the kind of look that suggested he'd seen some impressive bullshit in his time, but this was definitely making the highlight reel. "Sir, these documents don't appear to be legally valid," he said, his tone carrying the patient professionalism of someone who dealt with idiots for a living. "The supposed seller doesn't appear to have had legal ownership of the property to begin with." That's when I stepped forward, pulling out my own folder with the kind of casual confidence that comes from having actual legitimate paperwork. "Officers, if it helps, I have the certified deed and all relevant ownership documents right here," I said, handing over Henderson Holdings' perfectly executed legal documentation. "I think there might be some confusion about who actually owns this property." The contrast was absolutely brutal. Watching the deputy compare Trent's fake papers with my genuine legal documents was like watching someone try to pass off monopoly money at a bank. The difference in quality, authenticity, and legal weight was so obvious that even Trent started to realize he might have made a significant error in judgment. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when someone's entire world implodes in real time, let me paint you a picture. Imagine a controlled demolition, except instead of a building collapsing in a neat pile of rubble, it's a human ego getting systematically destroyed by the cold, hard facts of reality. That's exactly what I got to witness as the deputy held up Trent's pathetic excuse for legal documentation next to my genuine, certified, absolutely bulletproof ownership papers. The older deputy, his name tag read Martinez, and he had the weathered look of a man who'd been dealing with morons for about 20 years, examined both sets of documents with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen every flavor of fraud imaginable. He held Trent's papers up to the light, checked the watermarks, ran his finger along the edges, and generally gave them the kind of scrutiny that authentic documents welcome and fake ones fear. Meanwhile, my Henderson Holdings LLC paperwork practically glowed with legitimacy. County seals, notary stamps, official filing numbers, the works. 8 years of meticulous record-keeping and my father's paranoid attention to detail had created a legal fortress that would have impressed the Supreme Court. Trent was starting to sweat now, and I don't mean the light perspiration of a man who'd worn too heavy a suit on a warm day. This was full-blown, stress-induced. My life is falling apart, and I can feel it happening sweating. His expensive cologne was mixing with good old-fashioned panic to create an aroma that could have been bottled and sold as ode to desperation. "Sir," Deputy Martinez said, his voice carrying the kind of patient authority that suggested he'd delivered bad news to overconfident idiots before, "these documents you've provided appear to be fraudulent. The supposed transfer deed has no legal standing. The signatures don't match county records, and most importantly, the person who allegedly sold you this property never had legal ownership to begin with." Clara made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper, like air being let out of a punctured balloon. She was still plastered against the kitchen counter, but now she looked like she was trying to physically merge with the granite to escape what was happening in her living room. "That can't be right," Trent protested, his voice climbing about an octave as reality started penetrating his bubble of self-delusion. "Clara told me she owned this house. We went through all the paperwork together. She signed everything." Deputy Martinez turned to Clara with the kind of look that suggested he was really hoping she had some reasonable explanation for this clusterfuck, because otherwise his paperwork was going to be a nightmare. "Ma'am, can you provide any documentation proving your ownership of this property?" Clara opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, and generally did a pretty good impression of a fish that had suddenly found itself on dry land. Her perfectly applied makeup was starting to show stress cracks, and her carefully styled hair was looking a little less polished as she ran her hands through it in growing panic. It was supposed to be," she stammered, her voice getting smaller with each failed attempt to explain the unexplainable. "We've been married for 12 years. I assumed." "Ma'am," the younger deputy, Officer Chun, according to his badge, interrupted with the kind of gentle firmness you use on confused children and drunk college students. "Assumptions aren't legal documents. Do you have any paperwork showing your name on the deed, mortgage documents, tax records, anything that would establish your ownership claim?" That's when Clara did something that was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, depending on your perspective. She turned to me with desperation written all over her face, her eyes pleading for some kind of rescue from the legal quicksand she'd walked into. "Tell them," she said, her voice cracking with the strain of watching her master plan turn into a master disaster. "Tell them I'm your wife. Tell them we own this house together." All eyes turned to me, and I have to admit, this was the moment I'd been waiting for since this whole comedy of errors began. The spotlight was finally on me, the star of my own revenge fantasy, and I was going to savor every single second of it. I looked at Clara with the kind of sympathetic expression you'd give to someone who'd just discovered they'd been living in a delusion for the past decade, then turned to the deputies with my most helpful, cooperative smile. "Officers, Clara is indeed my wife," I said, my voice carrying the patient tone of someone explaining simple facts to confused people. "But that doesn't automatically grant her ownership rights to property that's held by Henderson Holdings LLC. As you can see from the documentation, This house has been owned by my company since we purchased it 8 years ago. Clara has been living here as my guest, but she's never had any legal claim to ownership. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife and served it at a dinner party. Trent's confident grin had completely evaporated, replaced by the kind of expression people get when they realize they've been played by a master. Clara looked like someone had just explained that Santa Claus wasn't real, and also he'd been stealing from her bank account for years. "No," Trent said, his voice barely above a whisper as the full magnitude of his stupidity started sinking in. "No, that can't be right. She said it was her house. She said she could sell it to me." Deputy Martinez consulted his clipboard again, probably checking to see if he needed to add any additional charges to what was already shaping up to be a very entertaining arrest report. "Mr. Wallace, attempting to purchase property from someone who doesn't own it is still illegal, even if you were unaware of the fraud. These documents suggest you may have been the victim of a con game, but that doesn't change the fact that you have no legal right to be on this property." That's when Trent's carefully maintained composure finally cracked like an egg hitting concrete. His face went through several different colors: red, purple, something approaching green, and his voice rose to a pitch that probably had neighborhood dogs tilting their heads in confusion. "You lied to me," he shouted, spinning around to face Clara with the kind of rage that comes from realizing you've been made a fool of in front of law enforcement. "You told me you own this place. You said it was yours to sell." "I thought it was," Clara shot back, her own voice rising to match his as their mutual delusion collapsed into mutual recrimination. "We've been married for 12 years. I live here. I decorated it. I thought that meant something." "Well, it doesn't," Trent screamed, his expensive suit now showing serious sweat stains and his perfectly styled hair starting to look like he'd stuck his finger in an electrical socket. "You can't sell what you don't own. Do you have any idea how much money I've already put into this?" And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the moment when their beautiful partnership started eating itself alive right there in my living room. You know how they say that when people are under extreme stress, their true character comes out? Well, watching Clara and Trent turn on each other like rabid wolves fighting over the last scrap of meat was like getting a masterclass in human nature's ugliest impulses. What had started as a beautiful partnership in betrayal was now becoming a mutual destruction derby, and I had front row seats to the whole spectacular shit show. Trent was pacing around my living room like a caged animal, his expensive suit now looking like he'd slept in it for a week, and his carefully styled hair resembling something that belonged on a scarecrow. The man who'd strutted into my house 2 hours ago like he owned the place was now experiencing what I can only describe as a complete psychological meltdown in real time. "How much money?" Clara asked, her voice carrying a dangerous edge that suggested she was starting to realize that her knight in shining armor might actually be a complete moron in an expensive suit. "What do you mean, how much money?" Oh, this was getting good. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, trying to look like an innocent bystander instead of the mastermind who'd orchestrated this entire disaster, and watched as the happy couple started tearing each other apart. Trent stopped pacing and turned to face Clara with the kind of wild-eyed expression that suggested his grip on reality was becoming increasingly tenuous. "I mean," he said, his voice rising to that special pitch that indicated a man who was about to say something incredibly stupid, "I've already put down deposits. Contractors, architects, interior designers. I've been planning this renovation for weeks." The deputies were watching this domestic nuclear explosion with the kind of professional detachment that comes from years of dealing with human stupidity, but I could see Deputy Martinez trying to suppress what looked suspiciously like a smile. Officer Chun was taking notes, probably for what was going to be one hell of an incident report. Clara's face went through several different expressions: confusion, realization, and then pure, unadulterated rage, as the full implications of Trent's admission sank in. "You've been spending money on renovations? On a house you didn't even know you owned? Are you completely insane? I thought I owned it because you told me I owned it." Trent shot back, his voice cracking like a teenager going through puberty. "You said it was yours to sell. You showed me paperwork. You said your husband was just going to roll over and accept it." That's when Clara did something that was either incredibly ballsy or incredibly stupid. She threw the blame right back at him with the kind of vicious precision that would have impressed a seasoned prosecutor. "You're supposed to be some kind of real estate expert," she screamed, her carefully maintained facade of sophistication crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. "You're always bragging about your portfolio and your investments and how smart you are with property deals. Didn't you think to actually check whether I owned the house before you started spending money on it?" The look on Trent's face was priceless. It was the expression of a man who'd suddenly realized that his supposed expertise was about as real as Clara's ownership claim, and that he'd been exposed as a fraud by an even bigger fraud. The irony was so thick you could have served it at a restaurant. "I trusted you," he shouted, his voice reaching a pitch that probably had the neighbors wondering if someone was torturing a cat. "You're my girlfriend. You said you loved me. You said we were going to build a life together. Yeah, well, that was before I found out you're a complete idiot who doesn't know how to verify property ownership." Clara fired back, her own voice climbing to match his. What kind of real estate investor doesn't do due diligence? At this point, the two of them were screaming at each other like characters in a bad reality TV show, completely forgetting that they had an audience of law enforcement officers who were documenting every word of their public breakdown. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, except the cars were made of pure stupidity and the crash was happening in my living room. That's when Trent did something that elevated this whole scene from merely entertaining to absolutely legendary. In a fit of rage that probably cost him about $5,000, he grabbed the expensive bottle of wine he'd brought as a housewarming gift and hurled it at the kitchen wall with the kind of force usually reserved for Olympic shot putters. The bottle exploded against my custom backsplash in a shower of glass and what looked like a very nice Bordeaux, creating an abstract art piece that I'm pretty sure wasn't covered by Trent's homeowner's insurance, mainly because he didn't actually own a home to insure. The crash was loud enough to make everyone in the room jump, including the deputies, who immediately shifted into a more alert posture as they realized this domestic dispute was escalating into potential property damage and public disturbance territory. "Sir," Deputy Martinez barked, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made smart people immediately stop whatever stupid thing they were doing. "You need to calm down right now, or we're going to have additional charges to discuss." But Trent was beyond reason at this point. The man had invested his ego, his money, and probably his reputation into this scheme, and watching it all crumble in front of witnesses was apparently more than his fragile psyche could handle. "This is bullshit," he screamed, his face now roughly the color of a ripe tomato. "I put real money into this. I've got contracts. I've got commitments. You can't just tell me none of it matters." That's when I decided it was time to twist the knife just a little bit deeper. I stepped forward with my most sympathetic expression, like a concerned neighbor trying to help defuse a tense situation. "Trent," I said, my voice carrying the kind of gentle patience you'd use with a confused elderly relative. "I think there might have been some miscommunication here. You see, Clara never actually owned this house. She's been living here as my wife, but Henderson Holdings LLC has been the legal owner since day one. I'm afraid any money you've spent based on Clara's representations was based on false information." The silence that followed was absolutely golden. Trent stared at me like I'd just explained that gravity was optional and water flowed uphill, while Clara looked like she was trying to calculate exactly how deep the hole she'd dug for herself actually was. "False information?" Trent repeated, his voice now barely a whisper as the full implications of his situation began to penetrate his skull. "You mean she lied to me? About everything?" I shrugged with the kind of casual indifference that suggested this was all very unfortunate, but completely out of my hands. "I'm afraid that appears to be the case. But look on the bright side. At least you found out before you actually moved in and started those renovations." And that, my friends, was the moment when Trent Wallace's last remaining brain cell finally gave up and died. Monday morning rolled around like the final act of a Shakespearean tragedy, except instead of everyone dying at the end, everyone just got exactly what they deserved. I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, owned by my own company, and enjoyed what was probably the most satisfying cup of coffee I'd had in 12 years of marriage. The weekend had been surprisingly peaceful after the deputies hauled Trent away for questioning, and Clara disappeared to whatever rock she'd decided to crawl under. The house felt different somehow, cleaner, quieter, like someone had finally opened all the windows and let out years of accumulated bullshit. Even the morning light seemed brighter as it streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating the spot where Trent's wine bottle had exploded in a shower of red liquid and broken dreams. I'd spent Sunday afternoon cleaning up the mess, not because I felt bad about it, but because I figured it was probably the most expensive cleaning job I'd ever done, considering it had cost Trent his dignity, his money, and quite possibly his freedom. Marcus had called me 3 times to get updates and laugh about the case, which was apparently already becoming legendary in legal circles around town. "Dude," he'd said during his final call of the day, "I've been practicing law for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone torpedo their own life so efficiently. It's like watching a master class in self-destruction. The DA's office is already talking about filing fraud charges, and the Real Estate Commission wants to investigate Trent's license. This guy's about to become a cautionary tale they teach in law school." But the real cherry on top of this whole beautiful disaster was what happened to Clara. According to the Neighborhood Gossip Network, which, let me tell you, operates with the efficiency of a Swiss intelligence agency, she'd checked into the Motel 6 on Highway 9 Saturday night and hadn't been seen since. The same woman who'd spent 12 years complaining about thread counts and demanding organic everything was now sleeping on polyester sheets and eating vending machine dinners. The poetic justice was almost too perfect to believe. Monday morning brought even better news. Marcus called me at 7:30, practically vibrating with excitement as he delivered the latest updates on Operation Destroy My Ex-Wife's Life. "Henderson, you beautiful bastard," he said, his voice carrying the kind of glee usually reserved for lottery winners and kids on Christmas morning. "You're not going to believe how much better this gets. Trent's in serious trouble. We're talking potential felony fraud charges, and the county's already started investigating the fake documents. But here's the really beautiful part. Clara could be facing conspiracy charges as a co-conspirator." I nearly choked on my coffee. Conspiracy charges? For what? Think about it. She knowingly provided false documentation to facilitate what amounts to attempted real estate theft. She signed papers claiming ownership she knew she didn't have. She accepted money from Trent based on fraudulent claims, and she attempted to illegally evict you from property she had no right to. That's not just stupidity, my friend. That's criminal conspiracy. The thought of Clara in an orange jumpsuit was so appealing I had to sit down for a moment to fully appreciate it. After years of dealing with her drama, her manipulation, her constant demands for more attention and more stuff and more validation, the idea that she might actually face legal consequences for her actions was better than winning the lottery. But the real satisfaction came from something much simpler than revenge. For the first time in years, I was sitting in my own house without having to worry about someone else's emotional chaos, financial irresponsibility, or complete disconnect from reality. The silence was golden, broken only by the sound of birds singing outside and the coffee maker doing its thing. No more Clara complaining about the neighbors, the house, the weather, or whatever else had managed to offend her delicate sensibilities that particular day. No more fake emergencies designed to manufacture drama where none existed. No more having to pretend that her latest scheme to redecorate the bathroom or reorganize the closets was the most important thing in the world. Just peace. Blessed, beautiful peace. Around 10 o'clock, I walked out to the mailbox to grab the newspaper and saw Mrs. Patterson from next door working in her garden. She looked up and waved, then walked over with the kind of concerned expression that suggested the Neighborhood Gossip Network had been working overtime. "Everything okay over there?" she asked, her voice carrying that careful tone people use when they want information but don't want to seem nosy. "We heard some commotion on Saturday, and we haven't seen Clara around." I smiled with the kind of genuine warmth I hadn't felt in years. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Patterson. Clara and I are getting divorced, and she's moved out. Nothing dramatic, just time to move on with our lives." The relief on her face was almost comical. Mrs. Patterson had been dealing with Clara's complaints about everything from property lines to garbage pickup schedules for 8 years, and I could see in her eyes that she was already planning to throw a neighborhood celebration. "Well," she said, trying to maintain appropriate sympathy while clearly fighting back a smile, "I'm sorry to hear about the divorce, but if you need anything at all, you just let us know. The whole neighborhood is here for you." Translation: the whole neighborhood was thrilled that Clara was gone, and they'd never have to deal with her manufactured crises again. By Wednesday, the legal dominoes were falling exactly as Marcus had predicted. The county had opened a formal investigation into the fraudulent documents. Trent was facing multiple charges and had apparently fired his lawyer after screaming at him for an hour about how the whole situation was impossible. And Clara had been contacted by investigators who wanted to discuss her role in the alleged conspiracy. But here's what really made the whole thing perfect. None of it required any effort from me. I didn't have to file complaints, hire investigators, or spend money on revenge schemes. Clara and Trent had built their own trap, walked into it willingly, and then spent the weekend making sure the door locked behind them. As I sat in my kitchen Thursday morning, reading about Trent's arrest in the local paper, while eating breakfast at the same granite counter where Clara had tried to destroy my life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction. Just clarity. My father's voice echoed in my memory one more time. Always own your foundation. People can steal your comfort, but never let them steal the ground beneath you. Thanks, Dad. You were right about everything. Clara and Trent learned the hard way that lies collapse while truth stands. And when they tried to steal my foundation, they discovered they'd actually bought their own downfall. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people destroy themselves while you watch from the safety of solid ground.